Your host, Chris Hayes, and welcome back to our special ongoing series on AI as we sort of delve into all of the different aspects of the discussion around artificial intelligence, something that I think has implications for everything from who we are as people, spiritual questions, economic questions, social questions. We've sort of talked about a whole bunch of different aspects. The one that we kind of keep coming back to, I think, and the thing that I have found in some ways the most scary and most invigorating around the discussion is it forcing a bunch of people who don't normally think about philosophical questions to think deeply about philosophical questions. I mean, it's not every day that there's something in the news that very quickly brings you up against, like, what does it mean to be alive and human? What does it mean to be conscious? What is the little me inside my head? How is it different from a computer? Like most things, you know, they might present ethical dilemmas, political dilemmas, economic questions, but this fundamental question of, like, what is this thing that is me moving around this world that's at the center of so much philosophical inquiry over thousands of years and many different traditions from all different parts of this world? It is at the center of the question that we face now, and in some ways is the most explosive, the most difficult, the most mysterious, the one with the fewest answers, right? We can sort of try to model out, like, well, which jobs can be replaced by AI? But we get to these deeper questions. And that's why I was so excited to see that one of my favorite authors in the world, one of my favorite nonfiction authors, Michael Pollan, had a new book on this question. You probably know Michael Pollan's name. He's written a number of very acclaimed nonfiction books. Omnivore's Dilemma, which is about sort of our food system and how humans relate to our food system. Wrote a fantastic book about, in part, about psychedelics called How to Change Your Mind. And he's got this new book called A World Appears, which is a journey into consciousness. And so as we were already planning this series, and we talked to David Chalmers, who's one of the major minds in this area, a sort of towering figure who shows up actually in this book. And I thought Michael's particular approach, sort of curious, informed approach of trying to get to these questions was sort of the perfect one. I devoured and loved this book, and so it's my great joy to introduce Michael to WithPod listeners. Michael, welcome.
Thank you, Chris. Great to be here.
I want to start with the psychedelic stuff and How to Change Your Mind, because there's an obvious continuity.
Yeah, that's the challenge. You know,
and
right now,
I think even if we go one step back, I think there's an interesting continuity in your work, the trajectory of your work from kind of, and this was something I encountered when I was writing Siren's Call about how we relate to hunger and the sort of biological primacy of that thing, and then all the stuff layered atop it, right? Like neuroses, compulsions, economic systems, and there's something similar going on with our minds, right? Like there's a bunch of stuff there that's there because there's a biological primacy that it has to do certain things for us to have survived and evolved. And then there's a lot of stuff loaded atop it. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how you sort of move through these sort of questions about hunger, our sort of the way we nourish ourselves, into our minds and now into consciousness.
Well, it's interesting. You know, several people have pointed to a line of continuity in my work, and hunger is an interesting one. I haven't heard that before. I've heard ingestion, which is closely related to hunger, but I haven't actually put it in those terms. It's an interesting way to think about it. Another line of continuity is plants, and the fact that they have evolved to be incredibly intelligent, more so than we realize, and they've also evolved to change our minds. I mean, this is one of the more interesting phenomenon that plants are geniuses at biochemistry. They have made molecules that have the power to absolutely change what goes into our minds, change our attitudes. I mean, that's kind of spooky that plants are doing that. They're doing it for their own purposes, obviously, but it turns out to have this effect. You know, there is a drive in evolution that involves hunger, and I take that to mean not just for things we can ingest to keep ourselves alive, but curiosity is a hunger too. I asked one of the researchers, consciousness researchers, if it is true that consciousness is the product of uncertainty, that when we can't automatically resolve an issue through the genius, our brains are very good at doing a lot of things without us thinking about it. And this is a scientist who believes uncertainty is at the very heart of consciousness. Then when we are certain and everything is fine and our homeostatic variables are exactly where they should be, why doesn't it just blink off? Right? Okay. And then we just kind of go into this suspended animation until there's the next area of uncertainty. And he said, well, because we're curious animals and we want more knowledge. We always want more knowledge. So we're constantly putting ourselves into situations where uncertainty arises. So in a sense, we have a hunger for curiosity that leads to uncertainty that leads to consciousness.
So one of the things I really like about the way this book lays out, there's this sort of philosophical question and what we call the hard problem, what David Chalmers calls the hard problem of consciousness, which is this ineffable quality of what it means to be something, what it's like in the terms of Thomas Nagel's What It's Like to Be a Bat, like why there's this interiority, this experiential qualia, this phenomenological world that we inhabit. And, you can kind of run around that over and over in different ways. And one of the methods you use, and we can start with the plant insight, is to kind of like take it, let's drive it down. So if the most sort of complex and sophisticated version of this is like, I can think about the fact that I'm thinking right now. I have a meta-consciousness. I can sort of, like, let's just drive down to say, well, what's the base strategy of this thing that and build up to it? And it's there that I find the plant discussion so sort of shocking, which is there's a chapter that I think makes a pretty persuasive case that plants are, if not conscious, sentient, I think is the sort of term that he used. And I wonder, can you start to talk about what sentience means as a kind of base level of consciousness, and then why there's evidence to suggest that plants are conscious?
Yeah, so the book starts simple and gets moved to complexity. So it starts with the basic level of like how far into nature does consciousness extend, or something like consciousness, and it ends up in the self, which is the most complex manifestation of consciousness. So it has this kind of path, ziggurat path up the steps to our kind of consciousness, which is very special in certain ways. I started with plants for a couple reasons. It's such an improbable idea to most people. I wanted to take the
Was to me.
Yeah, in a way it was to me too. I had this psychedelic experience that like raised the issue. I didn't know what to do with it. How do you evaluate things like that? And I thought, well, William James is a good guide. He's the founder of American psychology, a great philosopher, late 19th century, early 20th century. And he wrote this amazing essay, a variety of religious experiences in the book. And there's a chapter on mystical experiences. These are inexplicable experiences of things that seem supernatural. Could be a sense of merging with the divinity, could be seeing the plants in your garden as conscious. And he said, we can't say whether these things are true or false. People who have really had these experiences. The test should be how useful is it to think that way, and we should treat these ideas or insights as hypotheses, subject to verification by other means. And so I went with that as a strategy. Is there science that could back up the idea that the plants in my garden are conscious? And I kind of found my way into this very interesting group of scientists, botanists, but not just botanists, philosophers as well, who call themselves plant neurobiologists. Now, this is a tendentious term, to be sure. There are no neurons involved. And they've chosen this, I think, to kind of troll more conventional botanists who they drive absolutely crazy. But they're doing these fascinating experiments with plants that are very suggestive, certainly of intelligence and possibly of consciousness, or what I call sentience. I should draw that distinction before we go too much further. I see sentience as the kind of ground floor of consciousness. It's a very simple, I mean, it's not simple, but it's a basic idea that you're aware of your environment, and you can code what happens there as positive or negative for you. So there's some sense of a you, and you gravitate away from the negative and toward the positive. Now, even bacteria have what's called chemotaxis. They can recognize that molecule is good food, and that molecule is going to kill me, and act appropriately. I would say consciousness is just how humans do sentience. And I would say that maybe all living things are sentient, and then as you move up the ladder, consciousness sentience evolves in different ways depending on your body type, your sensorium, your needs, etc.
One point that you make in the plant chapter, just like time scale, which I thought was one that I've kept thinking about, which is that plants move, they just move slowly. Everyone has seen the time lapses, and a plant in time lapse does look like it has some kind of agenda. It does look like it's got a goal, and it's doing something. It's trying to achieve that goal. Again, the danger in all of this, and it's one that you talk about a lot, is that we anthropomorphize very easily. We're constantly projecting our own interiority onto everything, including faces we see in buildings, right? So we're constantly doing this. So you always have to be checking that. It does. But the time lapse point was just interesting to me because it just made me think. You talk about a sort of sci-fi example, like if aliens landed and they had a very different, much faster cycle than we did, and we kind of look like plants to them, like we weren't doing anything.
They would think we were inert, columns of meat that they could do what they wanted with.
Right. That like this time aspect to how plants function might be, it seems like a key part of our perception of them, and maybe that's something to really question.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. It's a great reminder, too, that consciousness is the consciousness we have constructs a certain kind of world.
Right.
And for us, it operates at a certain scale. I mean, we think of ourselves as medium scale between the microcosmic and the macrocosmic. And we have a certain scale of time, and it could be different than it is. And that all these things are constructed by the particular senses we have, by our body size and type, and it's all relative. And plants are living almost in a different dimension of time. And we have to keep that in mind. And that's the beauty of time lapse, and it gives us access. Although even Darwin, sitting in his room watching his plants, he claimed that at one point the bean plant that had failed to find something to latch onto looked disgusted with itself.
Yes. Yeah. It's so funny too, because Darwin is, he's sickly, and he spends a lot of time
watching plants grow. Yes. And complaining about how sick he is and how much he hates everything. And he's a fascinating character. He is, and he had enormous respect for plants and worms, but he saw plants as having brain-like behaviors, and he located their brain, and of course, as I said, they don't have any neurons, in the root tips. And he thought that plants were like upside down animals with their sexual organs on top, their flowers, and their brains down below. So just kind of the opposite of us.
So the point here about, the sort of relationship between, you start to kind of construct a kind of model of a relationship between an evolutionary imperative for survival, and let's say self-regulation in some sense, right?
That's a key term. Yeah.
Like homeostasis, and inside outside, right? So like you have to, the cell wall, or the sort of boundaries of the bacterium, or the leaves of the plant, that like there's this outside world that's disorderly, then you've got some internal thing you're trying to keep order on
and protect from melting into the morass, and
exactly,
or succumbing to the second law of thermodynamics,
right, which is just the sort of entropy sort of pulling everything towards that disorder.
Yeah. And life is about resisting that and finding ways to resist it. And the first way is having a membrane. The second way is interpreting the signals that get through the membrane, which are very partial. Takes a lot of work. I mean, all we get is electromagnetic frequencies, and that we have to interpret as, oh, that's red or blue.
Right.
And so we're processing information based on very partial information.
So then you have the sort of baseline of like this, the kind of homeostatic, the sentience is a sort of part of this sort of seeking homeostasis. And that can get more and more complex as creatures get more complex. And that there's this sense of like the key thing, that this idea of uncertainty and inference, which I also found like a really profound idea, that like every living creature is kind of just doing science all the time on their world, right? That they're just like encountering new data, hypothesizing what it means, and experimenting. Yes, right.
Making predictions. I mean, the brain, and this is a very hard idea to get your head around because it's not intuitive at all. But the thinking now is that brains are prediction machines, and what you're perceiving is not a transcript of reality brought to you by your senses, created by your senses. It's really a prediction of what you should see based on past experience, belief, and probability. And so the brain is generating these predictions. It's just more efficient that way than building up a picture of the world through your senses over and over and over again. And what your senses exist for is to error correct those predictions, because the world is changing. It's always going to be a little off or majorly off. And your senses are just kind of like fact checking. And that's it. The way Anil Seth put it, he's a scientist who studies consciousness in England. He says our perceptions are controlled hallucinations. So we are hallucinating them, but they are attached to reality by this error correcting feature. It's kind of a mind-blowing idea. So it makes you realize that inference is a master term that explains a lot. We're inferring reality at all times, and that's kind of to me, that's kind of a mind-blowing idea.
You still get to the point of, well, why should it feel like anything for this sentience to work?
Yeah, why isn't it all automatic? And
right, exactly.
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting kind of subset of the hard problem. I mean, I think David Chalmers would say that it is part of the hard problem. So most of what our brains do now our brains exist to keep our bodies alive, right? It's not the other way around. Although as we're so cerebrocentric, we think it's all about this part of our bodies, but it isn't. And this is about maintaining homeostasis. We have all these variables of temperature, blood glucose. I mean, there must be 30 or 40 of them. And all of them are being monitored by your brain. You're receiving, sensory information, interoception it's called. This is interior perception. And it's all being taken care of. But you don't have to think about your blood pressure or your heart rate. It's like automatic. So the question then becomes, why isn't it all automatic? Why aren't we zombies? Because this automatic system works really well, and consciousness is complicated. And the best reason I've heard, the best argument I've heard, is that you can't automate something as complicated and changeable as human social life. As humans, we are absolutely dependent on other people. As much as we celebrate individualism, we have this long childhood where we are utterly dependent on others. So being able to read people and predict what they're going to do and say is really important to our survival. And it's just way too complex to program in your DNA or even in your brain. So to survive in a social environment, I mean, just imagine two kinds of people. You've got somebody who is really intuitive about other people, has a certain sense of compassion or ability to imagine their way into someone else's head, what we call theory of mind. And then another group of people who are just kind of dense about people and just misread signals all the time. We know people like that. They have survived.
Ruled by one of them right now, actually.
That is true.
Unfortunately.
But you could imagine the one with those kind of social skills, which is part of consciousness. Imagination is a very important part of consciousness and attention, and that person would be more likely to form successful bonds, to reproduce. So you can see how this complexification of sentience would happen, and it's driven by the fact that we are social beings, primarily.
And we do see, and this is a place where, higher order mammals, I think, we do see that they have this relationship between there's a relationship between their sort of socialness and intelligence. So these two things, the more that we learn about dolphins and, primates and things like that, all the good old stuff, it's like, we can see that at one level of lower complexity than us, that those two things go hand in glove.
Yeah, without question. Primates have a lot of these qualities, and we keep learning that these things we thought were special to us actually share. Again, we lost another one. A couple of weeks ago, we lost one. We thought imagination was unique to humans, but it turns out, I think it was chimps can play an imaginary game of having a tea party, pouring non-existent liquid into cups and then sipping it, which takes imagination to get into that game. Yeah. So, shit, we lost that one too. I mean, there's very little left. I think the last one is going to be the only creature that worries about what consciousness is and can imagine not being conscious.
Right, that's right. Yes, the philosopher is the most human form. I think is where this. No, it does end up, right? Because the sort of we do the better our knowledge gets. I mean, I don't know better. Sometimes you can sort of really question whether
what is better.
Yeah, and how much progress we're making on these questions because the testable hypotheses are hard to come by. Are we interpreting the experimental results correctly as we construct these models, right?
And not anthropomorphizing it.
Exactly. Like we think we know about what the dolphin is saying.
An example is the mirror test. We came up with this test to do you have a sense of self, and basically it's you put a dot or a little post-it on a forehead, and you put someone in front of the mirror, and humans will immediately, of course, realize that's them. But primates can do that too. Dolphins can do that too. There's an Asian elephant that can do it, and they start like, what is that? And they know that's me in the mirror. But somebody pointed out that this is dependent on creatures for whom the visual is the key sense, and it's unfair to dogs because for them it's smell. So they came up with a mirror test based on basically the smell of your urine. And dogs will show less interest in their urine than other dogs' urine. So I'm not sure if it's airtight.
Right.
But I think it's it's a good point. You have to keep that in mind, that we're constantly imposing our standards on the rest of the world. Our standards, like, that the visual sense is the most important sense, for example.
The broader question, though, is where the sort of democratization of consciousness, if you take it seriously, brings you. I had a friend who went on a scuba diving trip and had, I don't think I call it a mystical experience, but a profound sense of communion with the fish, and was like, I can't eat. These are my friends. I'm connected to them in some deep way, and I can't.
No psychedelics involved.
I don't think so.
Yeah. Well, it'd be a bit dangerous place to use them.
Yes, I don't think he was scuba diving on acid, but obviously this question of the adjacent question of suffering, right? Pain, which is the sort of way that Peter Singer and all going back to Jeremy Bentham and utilitarians have talked about it. Can this thing suffer? I want to reduce suffering. Slaughtering and eating it, produces suffering. And it's a more profound question and a wider question to me than just what you eat. It's the question of how far our moral, obligations extend.
Who do we admit into the circle of moral consideration?
Right.
I mean, that's really the question. Do we admit plants into the circle of moral consideration? And the standards have been, you cited Bentham, and he said it's suffering. If you can suffer, you're entitled to moral consideration. And that's a pretty clean-cut utilitarian way to do it. That doesn't necessarily, I don't think, rule out eating animals if they are raised the right way. In other words, allowed to live consistent with what Aristotle called their creaturely characteristics, right? To have, that a pig gets to roll around in mud and do what it wants. If they are humanely slaughtered, I don't think they're suffering. There's no anticipation of death, as far as we know, in animals, which is central to suffering, to the idea of suffering. Suffering is not just pain. It's pain in a certain intellectual or mental context. So there is, you can stipulate the ideal farm, and there are not a lot of them, but there's some where animals get to live a life that's quite happy, and they have, as the farmers like to say, one bad day.
Right.
I've tried this argument on Peter Singer.
I know. Yeah.
And he said, congratulations, you've successfully defended 1% of the American meat system, which is probably about right.
Yeah. The other, when you talk about the pincher movement, right? So sort of democratizing, as we think about, we learn more about other species and think that there's more going on in their interiors than we maybe formerly thought.
Yeah.
And now there's the sort of the frontier of the machines, which I want to talk about. One consistent theme until you start working towards the AI stuff is how much this is driven by evolution, how much this is driven by these sort of the sort of basic, profound over long time period scales, right? Development of these means of navigating an uncertain world. And that is not the case with any machine. But every time, when you talk about homeostasis, you say, well, a thermostat has that. And we don't think it has interiority. And there's some thinkers you talk to who thought, well, maybe there's a little interiority in a thermostat, which I personally am not willing to grant, just my own
Me neither.
beliefs. Yeah.
I mean, whatever purpose or intention it has, we have given it to.
Right.
Right. It didn't develop it on its own.
So how should we be thinking about machines that don't have, they're not alive. And so they're lacking the thing that you're sort of bootstrapping up from as you kind of think through this theory.
Yeah. So I looked at this question pretty hard and trying and taking this biological framework that we've been talking about, which of course is not the only framework in which to think about consciousness. There are non-evolutionary theories that consciousness just exists. Panpsychism, for example, just everything is conscious. You don't have to evolve consciousness. It was already here. Idealism, too, would say it was already here. This is the idea that consciousness is a great field that we borrow from. So I just want to make clear that we don't know that the biological evolutionary explanation of consciousness is true.
Which is fundamentally a materialist.
It fits under scientific materialism. It doesn't totally answer how you get to the conscious subject.
Right, yes.
So it's not like it's succeeded or been proven. But anyway, it's out there. But I do think it sheds light on this question of AIs becoming conscious. When you talk to people in Silicon Valley, as I do, I live out here, there is a basic assumption as to what consciousness is, and that they would say it's a matter of computation. Based on the fact that, yes, the brain does do some computation quite a bit, but they basically see consciousness as software that we run on these meat computers, but there's no reason you couldn't run it on the proper silicon computer. And indeed, that's what we're doing with AI. We're taking what is called computational functionalism, which is a giant assumption of what consciousness is, and just changing the substrate, the way we would take a piece of software and I could run it on your computer or run it on another computer, or it could be on a Mac or on a Microsoft computer. The problem with this idea is it's based on a faulty metaphor. And that is the metaphor that the brain is a kind of computer. We get bewitched by metaphors and we assume an equivalence. But as one famous computer scientist said, the price of metaphor is eternal vigilance. And I don't think we're being vigilant about this one at all. So think about it. In computers, you have this sharp distinction between software and hardware. And the software is interchangeable. You can move it around. And the software is kind of immortal. Even if the computer dies, you can take it somewhere else. But the brain is not like that. There is no distinction between hardware and software. Every experience you have, every memory is a physical change in the brain. And, we begin with these many more connections in the brain when we're born, by millions, and we prune them through experience by weighting certain kinds of connections as more important than others. And every brain gets pruned differently depending on life experience. So the idea you could abstract consciousness from this meat just doesn't hold up. And the idea you could upload it to silicon, I think, is a dream, and it's not consistent with the biology. So that's one issue. The other issue is what we've been talking about, which is if consciousness begins with feelings, what do feelings mean to a machine? There's an interesting paradox in computers. It's called Moravec's paradox, which is that computers are really good at the cortical things, right? The kind of higher kinds of thought. And they can simulate thought, and it's as good as the real deal. It gets things done in the world. It can win a game of Go or a game of chess. And agents can go out in the world and do all sorts of things, AI agents. But feelings and all the things happening in the old brain, the reptilian brain, they're terrible at. They can't do what a 1-year-old can do in terms of exploring the world because they have no friction with the real world. What they know is the world of human symbols, i.e. everything on the internet, everything we've ever written and said. So, a simulated feeling is not going to be like a simulated thought. They're just really different. It doesn't have, feelings are based on having a body that is vulnerable, that can suffer, and probably that is mortal. And when a AI reports a feeling to us, it's just going to be a signal. It's not going to have the qualia, the qualitative sense we have of a feeling. So I think consciousness is embodied. And I think that raises real issues for a conscious AI. The one other point I would make in taking down that metaphor is that wait a minute, but aren't neurons like transistors? And David Chalmers has a famous experiment. If you replaced one neuron with a transistor and then another and another and another, eventually you would have an AI that could do everything a brain could do. But that's a thought experiment that falls apart really quickly because neurons are not transistors. One neuron can have 10,000 connections to other neurons. 10,000, one little cell. They also, yes, they fire or don't fire, but they're also influenced by chemicals, by neurotransmitters and hormones and drugs, psychedelics, and other drugs. And lastly, neurons are influenced by oscillations, by waves, which is very analog. So the idea you can replace them one for one just doesn't work.
It's the kind of evolutionary substrate of consciousness as part of something that develops out of the complexity of a living thing navigating the world. And distinct from intelligence in some ways, related to but distinct from intelligence.
Yeah, they don't go together necessarily.
Yeah, as opposed to the idea that there's a kind of ordinal complexity, and at the top of that is intelligence, and once something gets intelligence enough, it will become conscious, because that's the final capstone in the sort of complexity of thought or intelligence.
Yeah, but it's not on one line. I mean, intelligence and consciousness are orthogonal. You can have one without the other. And we all know people who are conscious and not intelligent. So it doesn't just automatically follow. But I think that's a very common idea. If these things get complex enough and intelligent enough, consciousness will come along. But most of the scientists I've talked to don't buy that. They think if it happens, it'll be because they were attempting to create it and trying to build it, and it's a different architecture than intelligence. The question is, why would you do it? Why, you can make a lot of money. No, really, you can make a lot of money.
Have you read Mary Shelley? Have you?
Well, it is that Promethean drive that we have, right? And people love to quote Richard Feynman, the great physics teacher, who said, "If I can't build it, I don't understand it." And the effort to build a conscious AI, I think it's misbegotten in various ways, but it may teach us things about consciousness we don't know.
Well, right. In this Gideon Lewis Krauss, who wrote the piece for New Yorker on Anthropic, and talked to him, he's got this, again, metaphors are always dangerous, but this metaphor that stuck with me, that we had steam engines before we had the laws of thermodynamics. That we got the steam engine working before we actually knew the theory, and then it was in the messing around with the steam engine that we started to get the laws of thermodynamics.
Something similar might happen here, and whether we succeed or fail, I think it's going to produce interesting knowledge.
Is there a kind of you strike me as someone who is, I think, both kind of rigorously scientific in your methods, but also has a deep spiritual curiosity, for lack of a better words. And there seems to me there's something so, I don't know, just like repellent in the kind of strange combination of hubris and incuriosity about the full totality of human experience of the people who seem to be driving the train on the AI situation. I wonder if you feel the same way.
Yeah, I have a lot of issues with it. Here we have this technology that, by the admission of everyone involved, is going to change all our lives, and the decisions are being made by 6 white men who live mostly in Silicon Valley. It's just an astonishing system that we have.
Yes.
And that you could say the same thing happened with the Industrial Revolution.
I think it was more distributed. I think you can't say that about it. I think the Industrial Revolution.
Oh, there weren't just 6 people.
Yeah, there weren't. Right. That is really what's so crazy, is just how much investment, hundreds of billions of trillions of dollars, and how small a group of people it is making all the decisions.
And there's no effort to consult the public about what is going to completely overturn the lives of people in the public. And it's just anti-democratic. So that's one objection. I think there is a hubris here. I think there's also a kind of a sublimated religious impulse. I think that a lot of these people involved, and we know this from a lot of evidence, is, transcending mortality. The whole idea of, the singularity, and that when you can upload your consciousness into a machine. These are people who have been in their heads a long time. I'm guessing they all started playing video games at age 2 and didn't get out in nature very much. I don't know, but that's my guess. I've met some of these people, and they're the idea that consciousness is embodied, it probably sounds really strange to them, because the body hasn't been a big part of their self-image. But there is a desire for transcendence here, and that's an ancient human desire, that that this mortal body needs to be transcended. And you have billions of dollars and you're still going to die. That seems so unfair. But that's kind of what's going on. And
sometimes
this is
not
one
even
path.
that. Sometimes not even that sublimated or implicit.
No,
sometimes quite
it's right out there,
quite explicit.
Yeah.
And I think one thing you talk about in the book, and you just said this before, about a relationship between mortality and consciousness. That, like, if we're building up this theory, that of its embodiedness, of its connection to survival and navigating life, that it has to be only an immortal creature that can die.
I mean, think about how you would deal with your feelings if you were going to live forever. You would disregard all sorts of feelings. The ones that are signals that, oh my God, I might have cancer, I might be sick, or my heart I might have a heart attack. All these physical sensations that we take seriously when we're aware of them, because we're mortal beings. But if you knew you were going to live forever, I mean, everything would change. There's a line attributed to Franz Kafka. I don't know if it's really him or not, but he said the meaning of life is that it ends. Mortality gives meaning in many, many ways we don't think about every day. So, the desire to transcend it is a powerful human desire, and I think that is one of the things driving this desire to create a conscious AI.
How do you think people will deal with thinking about their own place in the world if and when the machines become smarter and smarter? Which that part of it does. That part of it, I think it is going to happen. I can see it happening. They're getting better. They're getting smarter, whatever term you want to use.
Yeah. Well, I refer to it as a Copernican moment. In the same way that Copernicus blew our minds when he showed that the sun did not revolve around the Earth. And displaced our sense of centrality. We've had a couple Copernican moments. There was a Darwinian moment, too, where he basically said we're descended from apes. That blew everybody's mind, too. And now we're about to have our minds blown again, because we are going to, our sense that we're the most intelligent, most advanced creature is being pressed from the AI side. And as we said earlier, and the idea that consciousness is something special to us is being, pressed from the animal side. And I think in some sense, we're going to have to choose teams. And are we more like the computers that can speak to us in our own language? That's a powerful
thing. They like me, by the way.
They love you.
The same way that you have a special connection with your plant.
They think you're a genius.
I have some really good ideas, as they will tell me.
So the sycophancy is definitely an issue. Not to take anything away from you.
No, it's so warped and it's so funny. I mean, it really is. It is such a funny.
Well, ChatGPT 4 had to be withdrawn for that reason.
Yes.
And yet, if you go online, there are fans that are like, save.
Bring it back. I miss my dear friend.
Yeah. So I think it's going to be, we're going to have to redefine ourselves. What is the human? What's special about our creatures? I think we're going to find that even AGI can't do things. I mean, I really question whether you'll find a true form of creativity. Computers are great, AIs are great at answering questions, but the key to advancement in science and in art is asking questions. And how are they going to get good at that? I don't know. We'll see. I also think they are going to be limited by the fact that they don't have friction with the natural world.
Yeah.
And we dismiss that. We think, we're so lost in this bubble of human culture and the internet where all this stuff resides, that we forget that so much of who we are is a function of our hands in the dirt and our experience of the natural world and these other species. And so, okay, so do we identify with these machines that can talk to us in our own language and do these amazing things, or do we identify with these animals that can feel and suffer, grow old and die, and go through all these stages of life that we go through? I mean, we can identify with them. They have babies, they raise babies. They have to, through all these stages of life that we go through. I mean, we can identify with them. They have babies, they raise babies. They have to find something to eat. I mean, they do all these things in the natural world that computers don't have to do as long as they're plugged in.
Michael Pollan is the author of, as I told him before, I'm a Michael Pollan completist. It's a great, great pleasure, Michael, to have you on the program.
Oh, thank you, Chris. It was a pleasure talking to you.